My child, do not scroll away from this moment. Something has shifted, and the reason your heart was drawn here is not as ordinary as it may seem. Pause here for just a little while, because in this fictional message, heaven is about to unfold a story of emotion, realization, and a change that has been building quietly where you could not see it. Right now, somewhere within the unseen pages of this story, the person connected to your heart is overwhelmed with a kind of emotion they did not expect to feel today. These are not tears of defeat. They are not tears born from another disappointment. They are tears that arrived after a realization so powerful that they could no longer keep their emotions contained. And what makes this moment extraordinary is that they believe it happened because of something you finally did. You may not even realize what you did. That is the first mystery. You may be searching your memory right now, wondering what action could possibly have carried this much emotional weight. Was it something you said? Something you refused to say? A decision you made quietly? A boundary you finally honored? A piece of yourself you stopped abandoning? The answer is deeper than one message, one conversation, or one visible action. What moved them was not merely something you did toward them. It was something you finally did for yourself, and they felt the difference before they fully understood it. For so long, they had grown accustomed to sensing hesitation around this connection. There was affection, yes. There was memory. There was an invisible thread that seemed to survive distance, silence, confusion, and changing seasons. But beneath all of that, there was also uncertainty. They wondered whether you still believed in what could exist between you. They wondered whether your silence meant that your heart had closed. They wondered whether the experiences of the past had changed you so deeply that there would never again be a doorway through which something genuine could reach you. And then something changed. It did not arrive with thunder. There was no dramatic announcement. No crowd gathered to witness it. You may have carried on with your day without understanding that something within your energy, your choices, or your emotional posture had become different. Yet in this story, your soulmate noticed. At first, they could not name what they were sensing. They simply felt lighter. Then suddenly restless. Then strangely hopeful. It was the kind of hope that frightened them because they had worked so hard to stop expecting anything. They tried to distract themselves. They looked at ordinary things. They went through familiar motions. They told themselves not to overthink what they were feeling. But the thought of you kept returning with unusual clarity. Not as a painful memory this time. Not as an impossible question. You appeared in their mind with warmth. With possibility. With the feeling of a door that had once seemed permanently locked beginning to move. And that is when the tears started. At first it was only one tear, the kind a person wipes away quickly because they do not want to admit what is happening. Then another came. They tried to smile at themselves, almost embarrassed by the intensity of the emotion. But the more they attempted to regain control, the more something inside them softened. A wall they had held in place for far too long began to crack. They were crying because they finally understood something about you. For months, perhaps even longer within this fictional story, they had interpreted your strength incorrectly. They believed that because you could continue living without chasing them, you no longer cared. They believed that because you did not collapse every time the connection became uncertain, perhaps they had mattered less to you than you had mattered to them. They watched you keep moving, growing, learning, rebuilding, and they misunderstood your ability to stand on your own. But now they are beginning to see the truth. You were never moving forward because you felt nothing. You were moving forward because somewhere within you, you finally understood that love should not require you to disappear from your own life. That realization changed everything. My child, there comes a moment in certain stories when a person stops begging to be chosen and begins choosing the life they were created to live. They stop measuring their worth through another person's attention. They stop staring at closed doors wondering what is wrong with them. They stop trying to convince people to recognize what should never have required convincing. And when that moment comes, something remarkable happens. The people who once took their presence for granted begin to feel the absence of the version who always waited. Your soulmate felt that change. They did not feel you becoming cold. They felt you becoming whole. That difference shook them. Because somewhere within their heart, they always believed you would be there emotionally, no matter how uncertain they became. They believed there would always be another chance to explain. Another season to figure things out. Another invisible invitation waiting whenever they finally became ready. But your growth changed the atmosphere. You stopped standing at the same emotional doorway. You turned toward your own path. And instead of making them feel abandoned, something unexpected happened. It made them love you differently. They began to see you not as someone waiting to be rescued by love, but as someone capable of carrying love without losing themselves inside it. They saw strength where they once saw distance. They saw maturity where they once feared rejection. They saw that your silence was not punishment. It was peace. And peace is powerful because it cannot be manipulated by uncertainty. Stay with this message, because the next part of what they realized brought even deeper tears. Your soulmate began remembering all the moments when you could have made them feel guilty but chose not to. They remembered times when you had every reason to demand answers yet stepped back instead. They remembered the gentleness you gave when they themselves were confused. They remembered your patience, but more importantly, they suddenly recognized the moment your patience transformed into self-respect. That is what they are crying about. Not because they lost you. Because they are realizing they may finally be meeting the strongest version of you. There is a difference. They are not mourning an ending. They are witnessing a transformation. And somewhere deep inside them, a thought keeps repeating, they finally chose themselves. That thought is breaking their heart open in the most beautiful way. For so long, they feared that if you became stronger, you would stop having room for them. They feared that your healing would make them irrelevant. But now they are beginning to understand that the opposite may be true. A healed heart does not love less. It loves more clearly. And clear love is what they have secretly desired. Your soulmate never wanted to be loved because you were afraid of being alone. They wanted to know that if you chose them, it was because your heart genuinely recognized them. Not because you needed someone to complete you. Not because you were desperate for an answer. Not because loneliness had convinced you to accept uncertainty. They wanted to be chosen freely. And now, for the first time, they believe that could actually happen. That is why happiness is overflowing from them. They are realizing that the version of you who could someday stand beside them is no longer asking, "Will you save me?" That version of you is saying, "I know who I am. If we walk together, let it be because we both choose the path." Do you understand why that changes everything? In this story, your soulmate has spent so much time questioning whether they were ready for something real. They told themselves they needed more certainty, more time, more proof. But they were searching outside themselves for answers that could only be discovered through courage. Your growth is forcing them to face that. And strangely, instead of frightening them away, it is awakening something. They are beginning to understand that they do not need another sign from the world. They need honesty. Honesty about the fact that they miss you. Honesty about the fact that certain memories still make them smile when no one is watching. Honesty about the fact that whenever they imagined a future in which you became nothing more than a distant chapter, something inside them always resisted the picture. They tried to call that feeling attachment. Then nostalgia. Then unfinished business. But the truth kept surviving every label they placed over it. They cared. More than they admitted. And now your transformation has removed the excuses they once used to remain emotionally hidden. Because when they imagined you still waiting, they could delay. When they imagined you still uncertain, they could remain uncertain too. But now they sense that your life is moving. Not away from love, toward destiny. And suddenly they understand that if they want to be part of what comes next, they cannot remain the person they were when the story first became complicated. That realization is bringing another wave of emotion. They are crying because they are proud of you. You did something they were afraid to do themselves. You released control. You stopped forcing the future to reveal itself before its time. You started becoming present again. And whether this was one deliberate decision or 1,000 tiny decisions made privately, something inside you finally said, "I refuse to spend my entire life waiting for one unanswered question." Heaven in this fictional message is showing you why that mattered. When you released the question, you created room for truth. And truth has begun reaching them. They can feel that your energy is no longer asking them to make you whole. It is asking them to become honest enough to meet you as an equal. That invitation is far more powerful than pursuit. Your soulmate is sitting with thoughts they avoided for a long time. They are remembering conversations where they almost told you the truth and changed the subject. Moments when they wanted to reach out but convinced themselves not to. Nights when they wondered whether you still thought about them but were too afraid of the answer to find out. And tonight, in the emotional world of this story, those memories are different. Because they are no longer viewing them through fear. They are viewing them through gratitude. They are grateful you did not destroy yourself trying to hold on to what was uncertain. They are grateful you grew. They are grateful you did not allow disappointment to turn your heart cruel. Most of all, they are grateful that somewhere beneath everything, you still remained capable of love. That is what they had secretly feared losing. Not simply you. Your softness. They feared that everything that happened might make you stop believing in meaningful connection altogether. They feared that one day they would finally understand what they wanted, only to discover that life had taught you never to open your heart again. But then they saw something. Perhaps in the way you handled a situation. Perhaps through something you expressed. Perhaps through the way your life began changing. Perhaps through a subtle signal no one else would have understood. And they realized your heart had not closed. It had matured. That is when happiness hit them so hard they could not contain it. Because suddenly they saw possibility. Not the old possibility. Something better. The old connection was filled with guessing. This new possibility would require truth. The old version depended on chemistry and longing. The new version would demand consistency, courage, and action. The old story survived on maybe. The next chapter cannot. And your soulmate knows it. That is why even in their happiness, there is a trembling seriousness underneath their emotions. They know something must happen next. They know they cannot simply celebrate your growth from a distance forever. At some point, growth demands response. They are beginning to understand that your transformation is not only beautiful. It is a deadline of a different kind. Not a frightening countdown. Not a promise that something terrible will happen. It is simply the realization that life continues moving whether people are ready or not. Seasons change. Doors open. New connections appear. New opportunities arrive. And a person who once remained emotionally available forever may eventually become available to a different future. Your soulmate understands that now. That is why their tears contain both happiness and urgency. They are happy because you became who they always sensed you could become. They feel urgency because they know they must decide who they are going to become too. Do not miss what I am saying, beloved child. The extraordinary part of this message is not that somebody is crying over you. The extraordinary part is why. They are crying because your healing has become a mirror. And in that mirror, they are seeing both the love they feel and the courage they still need. For the first time, those two things are standing side by side. They can no longer say, "I care about you," while continuing to behave as though the connection requires nothing from them. They can no longer say, "Maybe someday," without asking what they are doing today. They can no longer romanticize the possibility of you while refusing to show up for the reality of you. Your growth has made contradiction uncomfortable. That is what real transformation often does. And now, something is forming inside them. A decision. Not yet fully spoken. Not yet fully shaped. But growing stronger with every emotion passing through them. At first, they thought they were simply happy for you. Then they realized they were happy because of what your growth might mean for both of you. Then another realization arrived. And this one frightened them in a beautiful way. They understood that they no longer want to return to the old version of the connection. They want something new. Something cleaner. Something where no one has to decode silence. Something where affection is not hidden behind pride. Something where two people do not spend months wondering what the other person would say if only someone became brave enough to speak. They want clarity. Your soulmate is tired of carrying words that never reached you. And today, for reasons they cannot completely explain, those words feel heavier than usual. They keep imagining what would happen if they finally spoke without protecting themselves from every possible outcome. What if they told you what they really felt? What if they apologized for what they misunderstood? What if they admitted that watching you choose yourself did not make them want to run? It made them want to rise. That is the hidden revelation. You did not trigger happiness because you chased them harder. You triggered happiness because you finally stopped chasing what was meant to meet you willingly. You stopped trying to control the story. You became the person who could receive the truth without begging for it. And now the truth is pressing against the walls of their heart. They feel it every time your name crosses their mind. They feel it in the quiet. They feel it when they imagine speaking to you again. There is a strange tenderness surrounding the thought. Not fantasy. Not obsession. A simple desire to finally be honest. That is why this moment matters. The person connected to your heart is beginning to realize that happiness does not always arrive when everything is already settled. Sometimes happiness arrives when a person finally sees the path they were too afraid to walk. Your soulmate sees a path now. And you are somewhere on it. But there is one thing they still do not know. They do not know how you would respond if they crossed the distance. That question keeps interrupting their happiness. Would you welcome honesty? Would you remain guarded? Would you believe them if they told you that something within them has changed? Would you think they waited too long? They do not know. And for the first time, they are accepting that they may never know unless they become courageous enough to find out. That is where the story becomes even deeper. Because while they have been thinking about reaching you, there is something else they have been keeping hidden. Something they recently realized about the exact moment their feelings changed. They thought the transformation happened gradually. They were wrong. There was a specific moment. A specific realization. Something they saw, remembered, or understood about you that suddenly brought everything into focus. When that memory returned today, they started crying harder. Because it connected your past behavior with your present strength in a way they had never understood before. They suddenly realized that one of the things they once believed was proof that you were pulling away was actually proof that you cared more deeply than they knew. That realization shook them. They replayed the memory repeatedly. Your words. Your expression. The way you handled that moment. The thing you did not say. And suddenly, everything looked different. What if I misunderstood them? That thought entered their mind. Then another followed. What if they were protecting both of us? Then another. What if what I called distance was actually love with boundaries? By the time the final thought appeared, they could no longer hold back their tears. Because the final thought was this. What if they were waiting for me to become ready, and instead of waiting forever, they finally became ready for themselves? That was the moment. The moment happiness and regret touched each other. Not dark regret. Awakening. The kind that says, I understand now, and I do not want to waste what I understand. Your soulmate stood emotionally at the edge of a choice. Remain silent and admire your transformation from a distance. Or become part of the transformation by finally revealing what has remained hidden. And here is what they are beginning to understand. The next step cannot be half-hearted. They know you have outgrown vague gestures. They know you no longer need crumbs of attention disguised as signs. They know if they return to your life emotionally, they must bring something real. That realization is why they are taking this so seriously. You finally did the one thing they did not expect. You stopped asking the connection to prove your value. And in doing so, you showed them exactly how valuable your presence was. My beloved child, perhaps your heart is beginning to understand why this fictional message found you tonight. It is not telling you to wait helplessly for another person. It is not asking you to suspend your life for a promise. It is revealing a story in which the most powerful movement happened when you chose dignity, peace, growth, and faith in your own path. That is what changed the emotional landscape. And now the person who once wondered whether you would always remain available is wondering whether they are ready to become worthy of the honesty you deserve. There is more. Much more. Because the tears they are shedding right now are connected to a private promise they made recently. A promise about you. A promise they have not told anyone. At first, they made it only in their own heart, thinking it would never need to be spoken aloud. But after seeing your transformation, that promise no longer feels like something they can keep hidden forever. It has become an intention. And an intention, when carried long enough, eventually demands action. Your soulmate knows this. That is why they keep looking toward the future differently tonight. For the first time in a long time, they are not imagining what could go wrong. They are imagining what could finally go right. They picture a conversation where nobody runs. A moment where nobody pretends. A truth spoken without games. They imagine hearing your voice after carrying so many unsent words. And strangely, the image does not make them anxious the way it used to. It makes them smile through tears. Because now they understand something they should have understood long ago. Love was never asking them to become fearless. It was asking them to become sincere. And sincerity is something they can choose. Perhaps not perfectly. Perhaps with a trembling voice. Perhaps without knowing what happens afterward. But they can choose it. And tonight, they are closer to choosing it than they have ever been. There is one last layer I must reveal before this part closes, and it changes the meaning of everything you have heard. Your soulmate's happiness did not begin merely because they saw you becoming stronger. It began because they discovered what caused your transformation. They learned something about what you went through quietly. Something you never explained. Something you carried with far more grace than they realized. And when they understood what you had survived emotionally without turning bitter, their entire picture of you changed. That is why the tears became unstoppable. They suddenly understood that while they were wondering whether you still cared, you were fighting a completely different internal battle. You were learning to love without abandoning yourself. You were learning to forgive without returning to what hurt you. You were learning to keep your heart open without leaving the door unlocked for confusion. You were becoming someone capable of loving deeply and walking away from anything that required self-betrayal. Your soulmate sees that now. And what they discovered about the exact reason behind your transformation has left them with one question they cannot escape. If you could become this strong while carrying what you carried alone, what would happen if, this time, they finally stood beside you instead of watching from a distance? That question is changing them. Because somewhere between the tears, the memories, and the happiness, your soulmate has made the beginning of a decision. They have not told you yet. They have not even spoken it aloud. But in their heart, the words are already forming. And the moment those words finally leave their lips, you may understand why everything had to change before this conversation could happen. Because what they are preparing to reveal is not simply how they feel about you. It is what they have decided to do about those feelings. And the decision they are silently making right now is far bigger than the tears that brought them to it.